South Carolina survives Virginia Tech, and this was a game that was sloppy early, and then we kind of saw the star power for South Carolina take over. Now, we did learn some things about both teams. We did learn some positive things. We also have some things that need to be addressed, need to be fixed. But overall, I think that these are two teams that South Carolina looks like it's in a good position. Virginia Tech is, I think, better than what people thought, including myself, going into this year. I thought that we saw some good things from this team, and this is a team that is going to be competitive. And the first half showed that. This was a team in Virginia Tech that kept things close. They definitely did what they needed to do to keep LaNorris Sellers in check. Now, the first drive wasn't great, I would say, but they found a way to settle in and keep LaNorris Sellers in check. Now, I was very curious why South Carolina didn't use LaNorris Sellers a little bit more in terms of running to the outside, getting him out in space, because he was a nightmare for Virginia Tech's DBs. And they did really good things outside of the tackles. But for the most part, Virginia Tech had the inside of the trenches locked up. I think that you look at what this team was able to do in between the tackles, you do have to give credit to Virginia Tech. They were able to do quite a few things on the interior. Guys like Kamari Copeland were having, honestly, a field day. And the safety early in the game kind of indicated that. You saw that they were getting pushed, they were being disruptive. And South Carolina, in a way, didn't really know what to do with that they weren't able to get out in space. And even when Virginia Tech was making mistakes, the interior defensive line was able to step up in a big way. And that's a really exciting thing if you are a Virginia Tech fan. I think your defensive line is going to be very exciting, very disruptive, and that interior defensive line had some good depth. Copeland wasn't the only guy making plays, but he was just the guy that stood out the most to me. And almost had a couple of other plays. If it's almost any other quarterback besides LaNorris Sellers, Kamari Copeland would have had a monster day. And he did. You know, again, this is why you don't just look at the box score. Kamari Copeland was in the backfield for Virginia Tech, in South Carolina's backfield, multiple times. And I think that overall you feel that you have a good player there and you can kind of build around him. I thought the linebackers played pretty well overall. Caleb Woodson was, I think, being as disruptive as he could, flying around the field and making plays, but you kind of had to cover a lot of field against South Carolina's offense. But again, if you're not facing LaNorris Sellers, you probably are in a much better position to make more plays because he's just a freak. We saw it on the last drive. Kamari Copeland had him essentially tackled, and LaNorris Sellers breaks that. We'll talk about Sellers here more in a little bit. But for Virginia Tech, defensively, I think you're in a pretty good spot as long as you don't face another LaNorris Sellers or Nick Harbor. That part really is where you kind of saw this group get hurt the most. It was just a really hard thing for them to overcome, is just freakish talent that you don't have on your team. And that's kind of how this South Carolina team pulled away, and they were able to make the plays that they needed to make in order to make this win happen. Now, offensively, there are things that need to be fixed for Virginia Tech. Kyron Drones, I will say that he did make some nice throws. There were a couple of nice balls that he threw to Aiden Green and Donovan Green that were in the exact right spot, over the shoulder, away from the defender. And granted, those guys were having to make some incredible catches, but at the same time, your quarterback's got to put that ball in the right spot. So overall, I feel pretty good about some of the things that Kyron Drones did, but overall, you do feel like there are some things he has to fix. 15 of 35 for 221 yards and 2 interceptions, not ideal. And then when they got to a point where they had to throw, it felt like they were kind of behind the 8 ball in a way. They didn't have a ton of confidence in their passing attack, so that definitely hurt. A couple drops didn't help earlier in drives as well, so that's something that can get better. I thought, though, that Aiden Green is going to be really fun. He had a couple drops, which one of them was a tough catch. The other one was a short crosser. That's a little bit frustrating. Donovan Green is going to be really fun. He proved to be pretty explosive. Same thing with Aiden Green. Both those guys, I think, are going to be really fun for Virginia Tech if they can play at the level they did today. If you can do that against South Carolina, You can probably do that against a number of teams, if not pretty much all the teams that are on Virginia Tech's schedule. So if you're a Hokies fan, that is something you should be excited about. Now, the rushing attack, I really like what I saw from Hawkins. Overall, though, not super effective, not overly exciting. And again, you're going against a South Carolina team that has plenty of talent. And I do like what Philip Montgomery tried to do. I think he had some limitations because you're going against a guy like Dylan Stewart. You're going to have to find ways to scheme around him. And they did that early on. You just can only contain him for so long. You can only hold him away from the game for so long. And they were doing a lot of great things. They were putting reads on him where he was the read for their option routes, their RPOs. The plays that they ran, they were putting him in conflict, or they were just going away from him, sending extra help his way. And I think that Tomas Rimac is going to be a really good player for them. I think that he did a good job on Dylan Stewart when they faced him. They also switched things up quite a bit. They kept Dylan Stewart in check for a lot longer than they thought that they could. Now, the second half, he obviously steps in and plays well and makes some key impact plays, but Virginia Tech did a lot of good things until it got to the point where talent level pretty much just took over. And we'll flip to the South Carolina side of things. South Carolina in the first half, the first drive looked really good. LaNorris Sellers absolutely just ran through Virginia Tech. It felt like this one could get out of hand if Virginia Tech didn't have an answer. Now they did, but the nice thing for this South Carolina team is that they're battle tested. They know what happened last year and they are a focused team and they took care of business. They also really went back to the Beamer ball days to get things on track in the fourth quarter. Bakari Swain has the 80-yard punt return for a touchdown to make it 17-8. And that was great. They had the punt and there was a penalty. Shane Beamer says punt it again. And you have that 80-yard punt return, which kind of opened up the scoring for this team. So special teams are a big part of that. You also had a big time throw from LaNorris Sellers to Nick Harbor for 64 yards to make it 24-11, which was ultimately the final nail in the coffin. And Virginia Tech on that play leaves Nick Harbor one-on-one. And I think that if you can get hands on Nick Harbor, that's not a bad strategy. But if you're not going to, you're basically asking your corner to run with a guy who has elite track speed. That's never going to end well, period. That's never going to be a situation that you win. And it didn't go well for Virginia Tech. And I think that Nick Harbor had some issues today. It looked like he wasn't super comfortable catching the football. It didn't look like he had a ton of confidence with his hands. It just looked very rigid. And that's something that I'll be paying attention to. I think that it's first game jitters. It was early in the game. He did make a nice catch that ultimately got called back. Again, we saw it with LSU last night with Barry and Brown. What is a catch anymore? That's going to be a point of contention for a lot of people this offseason or throughout the season. What constitutes a catch? What is a catch? I think that some of these catches that are being made and getting called back deserve to be called receptions, and that took points off the board for South Carolina. So if you're a Gamecocks fan, you feel maybe that you got kind of cheated out of those points. But overall, I think Nick Harbor is going to be very fun. And if you would have given him that touchdown, he had 2 touchdowns on the game. That would have been a really great way to start the season. And then LaNorris Sellers. LaNorris Sellers is going to be really fun. He was a big piece to this offense. Not really that surprising, but 12 and 19 for 209 yards and 1 touchdown. It was overall not his best game as a passer. I think Virginia Tech at times was daring him to go through his progressions, go through his reads, and show that he can do that. And there were times where it was almost like he looked at his first read, and if it wasn't there, he just wanted to run because he's a tremendous athlete and can do a lot of damage to the teams that are playing against him. The problem is that if teams are sitting back and making you try to beat them with your arm, they're going to be ready if you take off running. And now maybe LaNorris Sellers is able to make some of those plays happen, but I think that there are things that Virginia Tech did well to kind of keep him in check and keep him at bay. Now, at the end of the game, you saw what he's capable of doing, right? You saw the physicality. You saw the freakish traits where tackling him is going to be a problem. And I might honestly start just a highlight tape of missed tackles that most quarterbacks, if not all quarterbacks, would be sacked or go down on, and LaNorris Sellers just breaks them with no problem. That's going to be something fun to watch. We were talking about Rasul Faison coming into this week, find out recently that he's going to be eligible to play. For the most part, relatively pedestrian. 7 carries for 40 yards. He had 1 run for 30 yards. That was fairly impressive. You take away that, he's 6 rushes for 10 yards. That's not great, but also I think that goes back to Virginia Tech's defensive tackles. The defensive line played really well, and you have to tip your cap to Virginia Tech for what they were able to do. I think that's going to be a really fun group, and South Carolina did battle. They did fight as much as they could, and it's going to be something that has to get better. But again, you don't expect to be perfect in week 1, and the rushing attack is part of that. Oscar Attaway, 14 carries for 60 yards. So I think you have a solid 1-2 punch there. And if they can get settled in a little bit more, that's going to be a good complement for LaNorris Sellers and what he is looking to do offensively. But overall, I think it's a solid win for South Carolina. You get to play a team that is better than people expected. That's a tougher test, which almost in a way is better. I don't know. I mean, sometimes you probably are better off playing a team where you can just blow them out and get your backups in. But I thought this was a good test for South Carolina. There were things that Virginia Tech did well that made them work for it, and it kind of refocused them. It gave them an opportunity to refocus, dial in, and look at what they needed to do to win this game and execute at a high level. And I think that they did that, especially in the second half. They realized this is a battle, and we are going to have to treat it like a battle, and that gets them focused. And this is a team that, when focused, is really good. And when Dylan Stewart was kind of taken out of the game, other guys stepped up. Granted, in the second half, Dylan Stewart finally emerged and did some good things for that defense. We'll also keep an eye on his shoulder, if that's actually a thing, or if he just got dinged up a little bit on a play. But Dylan Stewart is another guy. You have 3 guys on this team that are headliners, and they are going to be fun all year. And it's just going to come down to how does the talent around them help out and contribute. But overall, Shane Beamer should feel excited. It was a fun game for him. His dad's former team, Virginia Tech, Beamer ball plays a big role in this game, and it was just fun overall, a fun game to watch. And if you're a South Carolina fan, you feel pretty good. If you're Virginia Tech, you're obviously disappointed, but there is reason for optimism heading into the rest of the year.